He has a big idea, so I'm gonna let him explain that. Because winning elections in America is really hard. But Pastor Shane Vaughn thinks he has figured it out, solved all the riddles on how to effectively always win elections. So let's let him explain how to do that.
You really shouldn't have even shown up to vote, because we're going to stop you in the population centers. And I looked across that state and I said, you know what? Everyone in that state is a conservative, except for those 2 blue dots. And that's when it hit me like a stroke of genius. That's what the founding fathers feared for the nation. But what they feared for the nation is happening in the states. The office of a senator is just like the office of the president. It is a statewide campaign. It is statewide. Therefore, I am of the opinion that the only way to save the Senate in the United States of America is that the Senate election should also be done by the Electoral College of a state.
He got hit by a stroke or something, but it sure as hell wasn't genius. So that was Pastor Shane Vaughn. And he had an epiphany on Senate races and decided to throw democracy out the window. He wants an electoral college-like system in Senate races, but he forgot about something or just didn't know that it existed. And that would be the 17th Amendment to the United States Constitution. So David Badash from the New Civil Rights Movement said that Pastor Vaughn apparently has since learned a little about the 17th Amendment to the US Constitution, and that America effectively used to elect senators in the manner he described. Except the Electoral College for the states was the state legislator. The 17th Amendment, in effect since 1913, allowed for the people to directly elect their own senators. Now Vaughn is demanding the repeal of the 17th Amendment. So let's listen to him justify why we need to get rid of the 17th Amendment.
And what we must do is repeal 17. Otherwise, you're going to have a blue House and a blue Senate. And ladies and gentlemen, you cannot govern that way. I knew it when I saw Herschel Walker lose that election, and I saw a massive turnout of red all over that state. Matter of fact, it was more of a turnout than they were expecting. The state showed up to get a red representative, a senator. However, Atlanta said, no, not today. We're going to give you Warlock. It's not fair.
It's not fair. It's not fair when the person who gets the most votes wins the election. I mean, come on, what do we live in? Some sort of democracy? But his goofiness aside, we know that Republicans are willing to do whatever it takes to undermine democracy and seize power. We saw that on January 6th. But right now there's something almost more insidious taking place, and it's taking place at the Supreme Court. Now, this is not a violent insurrection, but more of a silent insurrection. So right now the Supreme Court is deciding oral arguments over the Moore v. Harper case and how Republicans could overturn democracy. J. Michael Luddig from The Atlantic explained what that is. He said, in Moore v. Harper, the court will finally resolve whether there is a doctrine of constitutional interpretation known as the independent state legislator. If the court concludes that there is such a doctrine, it would confer on state legislators plenary, exclusive, and judicially unreviewable power, both to redraw congressional districts for federal elections and to appoint state electors. He continued on and said it would mean that the partisan gerrymandering of congressional districts by state legislators would not be reviewable by the state courts, including the state's highest courts under their state constitution. So essentially what this means is that Republican-controlled state legislators would have the power to overturn votes in federal presidential elections. So there wouldn't need to be another January 6th. Instead, the legislators can pick their own electors through this theory. So fortunately, it seems like a majority of the Supreme Court is ready to reject this theory. Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett have taken an originalist approach to the Constitution. CNN reported that Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett asked questions suggesting skepticism of the maximal version of the independent state legislator theory. Kavanaugh said he thought the legislator was overreaching and how it was relying on a concurrence from then Chief Justice William Rehnquist in the 2000 Bush v. Gore case. However, the other three far right-wing justices on the Supreme Court are flirting with this theory. Some of the members of the court's conservative wing, particularly Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch, have already indicated in writings for other cases that they're sympathetic to the arguments of the legislator. So Alito posed a series of hypotheticals meant to test the limits of arguments that looked at different scenarios where a state Supreme Court would commandeer the job of congressional map drawings from state legislators. Now, of course, people like Pastor Vaughn are just absolute clown shows, and he can sit on his live stream and theorize about, how we're going to repeal the 17th Amendment. But there is a lot of money going into actually fighting to overturn democracy through our court system. And I'll say I'm not as optimistic as these CNN reporters. I know how far deep in the pockets of the Federalist Society our Supreme Court justices are. If the Federalist Society tells them to dance, they'll dance. If it tells them to legitimize the independent state legislator doctrine, they will do that. I mean, Cenk, you went to law school. What are your thoughts on this? How do we stop this undermining of democracy?
Yeah, Moore v. Harper is probably the most dangerous case I've seen in a long, long time. I'm gonna say something that's controversial. I started a whole group to end Citizens United called Wolfpack, wolf-pack.com. But I think Moore v. Harper might be even more dangerous than Citizens United, because it basically would allow Republicans to say, we don't care who you voted for. The legislature is going to decide. The legislator, all of them are gerrymandered to have enormous advantages, sometimes for Democrats in blue states, and I hate that as well. But mainly in the swing states, it's red legislatures, and they're basically saying, we're coming for your democracy. We're going to end it now. So it's a disaster in the making. I'm with Ray Vaughn. I don't trust those conservative justices at all. We'll be super lucky if it gets voted down, and if it doesn't, the next election might be irrelevant, not because of what that pastor is saying, but for the exact opposite reason. I mean, look at that pastor was telling on himself. He, in another portion of those clips, he said, well, what's the point of voting if we're just gonna get outvoted and we're just minorities? Okay, and he said, everyone in the state voted for Republicans except the population centers. I think the population centers are relevant, but he doesn't even think that those are real Americans, real people. And getting rid of the 17th Amendment is saying getting rid of democracy. And basically he's saying otherwise they're all gonna be blue. They're saying we are the minority, Republicans are. In Georgia and elsewhere, we cannot win. We suck at this. The country is blue, the country is democratic. And he said you can't govern that way. What he means is we can't govern that way, so screw democracy, let's just grab power, and the Supreme Court might help him do that.
I'll just end on this. It's not lost on me that he's talking about the Senate, which is a pretty anti-democratic part of our Congress to begin with. It's meant to stop the progress of any legislation. So this is what they want. This is what they love.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.